Hi friends, welcome. My name is Darina Gilmore-Young and I'm here today sharing with you a devotional that I wrote called Running Through Life's Hurdles. This is part of a collection of devotionals that are going to be released in a book called Walk, Run, Soar in 2020. I'm excited to share it with you, and if you'd like to keep in touch, if you hop over to my website at darinagilmore.com, you can connect with me there and get all the insider information about my book that's coming out. So let's jump in for today. You know, I was a soccer player when I was a young person, and when I got to high school, I went to a private school that was pretty small and they didn't have enough girls for a girls team. So my parents urged me to go and talk to the boys coach who had coached me in some other sports and was also my history teacher. And I went and talked to Mr. Churchill. So Mr. Churchill, we fondly called him Church, and he agreed that he would let me play on the boys soccer team if I promised, he made a deal with me, if I promised to be on the track and field team. And I had never done track before, but I knew that I loved running, and so I thought it sounded like a pretty good deal. And I signed up to play both of those sports with him coaching. And I remember in the spring of that year at one of my early track meets, one of my first track meets that I competed in, that Church walked up to me and he said, "Hey, do you want to run in the 300-meter hurdles?" And I kind of laughed. I raised an eyebrow at him because I said, I've never run hurdles before. And he said, "I know, I'll teach you." So in Church's signature way, he inspired and challenged me to do something that I didn't know I could do or even believe that I could do. And so he hauled me out to the middle of the track, and just there in the grass, we grabbed a hurdle and he taught me a little bit about hurdle form, and then he let me just jump in the race. And so I ran my first 300-meter hurdle race, and surprisingly, I fell in love with that race. And I don't know what it was. It just was something that was challenging to me. I felt just inspired. There were only a handful of us girls in that first race, but I love that feeling of just soaring over the hurdles and the thrill of coming from behind and being able to win that race. And I probably didn't have very much form or strategy in that race, but I fell in love. And so after that, I started to work a little bit more seriously on my hurdle skills. I actually connected with another teacher from my school, Mr. Kritzberg, who taught me a little bit more about running and hurdle form. And one of the things that Mr. Kritzberg said is that I needed to learn how to run through the hurdles. So the focus was not jumping over the hurdles, but being able to run through them. And what he really wanted me to learn was how to keep a steady cadence as I ran quickly, and just to lift my legs slightly, my lead leg, and then snapping that lead leg down so that I could keep running and get to the finish. And the strategy here was that if I spent too much time focusing on that hurdle itself, or worrying about falling or any of those things, that I would sacrifice my speed in the race. So the goal was to graze over the hurdles and to keep my eyes on the finish line. So here's the thing, hurdles are like the obstacles and challenges that we face in our life. And I want to read for you from a passage in the book of James. One of my favorite passages and couple verses in James chapter 1. And just to jog your memory a bit, James was the brother of Jesus. He was the half brother of Jesus. So they had the same dad, Joseph. And after Jesus' ministry and after his death and resurrection, James is left among the disciples, and he becomes one of the pillars of the Christian church. And he was a Jew. He was writing to the Jewish Christians in this book about faith and works and how those two relate to one another. So James was a practical guy. He was talking about practical ways for believers to live out their faith. And so in James chapter 1, he opens the book by talking about the purpose of trials. James 1, verses 2 through 4 in the NIV version, it says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything." You know, in James 1, verse 2, we learn that we are to consider it joy. That's the phrase in the NIV. And some of the other versions talk about considering it great joy, or to consider the joy when we face trials in our lives, because that produces endurance and perseverance. But the reality is that sometimes it's hard to approach life's hurdles with joy. Maybe you've recently lost a job, or you're navigating tension in your marriage. Maybe you've been traversing infertility or battling depression. Maybe your kid is struggling, or you're navigating some chronic pain. These are big hurdles, my friends. And it says in these verses to consider it joy. Well, that requires some mental exercise. In other words, we need to make a decision to have a joyful attitude. It doesn't normally just come naturally, especially when we're going through trials. When we see hurdles in the lane in front of us, we can so easily get caught up into thinking about the worst case scenarios and the hardship itself. And we can even start to obsess about how the race will turn out, instead of simply taking that next step forward. We can focus on the hurdles, or we can focus on the finish line. So these trials, this suffering, these troubles, these conflicts that we are navigating in our lives, they are the means through which God works in us as believers. He uses these hurdles to refine, to purify, and to sanctify us. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I am not saying to avoid or push down our pain, our trauma, our grief, our conflicts, the trials that we're going through. Sometimes we need to stay and do the deep healing work in those places. But what I am saying is that we need to keep the goal, the finish line, in mind. And so let's go back to James chapter 1, verse 4. What's the goal? It says to be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. And when we see that goal, perseverance has a purpose. The purpose is to produce a deeper, stronger, more certain faith. Perseverance means heroic endurance, according to Peter H. Davids. And I love that kind of phrase and definition, heroic endurance. You know, when I was pregnant with my second daughter, I had a wonderful nurse midwife, and her name was Marilyn. And my first birth was a little bit traumatic in the hospital. I won't go into details about that right now, but my husband and I chose to have our second baby at home. And Marilyn was someone who we really trusted because she was a nurse and she had the medical and hospital background of delivering babies, but she was also a midwife. And so she cared deeply, and she was a strong believer in the way that God created our bodies to birth. And so as she was coaching me through the contractions as I was birthing my second baby girl, Marilyn gently reminded me that contractions were painful but important work in helping my baby girl to enter into the world. And so my instinct was to grit my teeth, to just squeeze my muscles and to hold my breath. And she said, you know, that's actually not helping your child to come through. You actually need to relax and to breathe through those contractions. It didn't mean the pain was going to go away, but the pain was for good. And that shifted my perspective when she said that. And I was able to relax and focus and trade my fear for perseverance. For perseverance to birth that baby girl into the world. So I have a challenge question for you. What are some of the hurdles in your life right now? I want you to think about that for a moment. You see, even if you're not physically running over hurdles on the track, there are hurdles that we all must face in our everyday lives, in our training, in our mothering. And friend, Don't focus on just that trial right in front of you, because we can get so laser focused on it that we forget to lift our eyes to what God has for us in the process of learning perseverance. So my prayer for you is that you would be able to surrender these obstacles to Jesus, and that you would be able to visualize yourself today running through those hurdles. I ask God to grow perseverance in you and in me during this season, and to keep our eyes fixed on the horizon. We have to let perseverance finish its work, and we have to trust God to carry us to the finish line. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you over at my website at DarinaGilmore.com.